So actually, we're going to record the session, and it'll be saved, and I'll be able to send this out to Mark so they have a copy of it, and should anybody want to review it, they can. Okay. All right, so one item I want to start with is the program enrollment versus member enrollment. And why that's important is when you are working with a family especially, what you see on the project enrollment screen here is the household enrollment. It's not the individual household members enrollment. So for example, with my test family, I have the test head of household and a child and a grandparent. So the test head of household, this is not their member enrollment. This is the enrollment that was created when you started the enrollment for this particular household. If I want to look at an individual's enrollment to know an individual's start date, it's very likely that, for example, here, that this is the start date for all the family members. But it's also possible that the child may have had a start date that's different than the household start date. So if you ever need to know what a particular member's start date is, you would click the gear and go to member. And you're going to see the member list here, or you're going to see the household list here. And all you have to do is go to Add Edit, and this will show you anybody who is enrolled in that particular project. Now, if you see something like this, this just means that these two members are not added to the particular enrollment that I'm looking at. And that's fine. It could be that the parent joined the particular project on 7/22/18. The children or other members did not go with them into that particular agency or to that project. But were they all together? Let's say I wanted to add the child here, so I'll just add the child so we can have them there. And I'll do, because I'm in Salvation Army, I'm just going to add that real quick. So if, for example, the child was going to join the enrollment, I could add the start date here for the child, the actual start date. But the key being is that what I want to make sure everybody understands about Caseworthy and the landscape of Caseworthy is that a lot of times when people are looking at a client record and they think they're looking at the project start date or the enrollment start date, that might not be the case for other members of the household, okay? Has everybody had an experience with that where you've had to look up a member's start date and thought that this was the actual start date for everybody in the household? If not, I mean, if this is something that you're all aware of, that's fine, that's good, you're ahead of the game. I can't see you, so if you're all nodding, then that's good too. So the next thing I want to make sure we touch on is we're going to go through adult-only data and all-member data. So adult-only data is non-cash and income, meaning that anybody in the household who is 18 or above, you will collect non-cash and income data. Anybody under the age of 18, you do not collect those two data points. So let's assume in a particular enrollment that the child is disabled. The child's 12 years old and is disabled, and the household receives $600 in disability income on behalf of that child. That income on enrollment would get assigned to the head of household. So when you do the financial spreadsheet, you would include that child's $600 with the overall household income when you're doing that enrollment for the head of household. You would not, if for some reason the financial spreadsheet opened during enrollment, you would just put 0, or you'd put no for income and then save no income. It's been somewhat of a surprise to some of the agencies I've worked with. So if it's not to any of you, that's good. If it is that a surprise to anybody out there? Did everybody, is everybody aware of that HUD rule? Okay, all right. The next one is all member data. So health insurance and disabling conditions is associated with everybody in the household. And for the most part, that's been pretty consistent from the data that I've seen. Annual assessment rules. For those of you who have done, has everybody done an annual assessment out there, or have you not?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, all right, so the annual assessment rules are this, is that the annual assessment has to be dated within 30 days before the project enrollment or within 30 days after. And that all that means is, so for example, this particular person, let's say, entered 7/22/2017. So when you go to do their 2018 annual assessment, it would have to be dated sometime around 6/23/2018 to 8/21/2018. So those would be the allowable dates when you create the annual assessment. And the nice thing with Caseworthy, if you use the annual assessment tool, which is right here off the word enrolled, you just click that. And if you click complete annual assessment, it will launch a workflow that won't allow you to put in a start date for the annual assessment that doesn't match that rule. The downside to Caseworthy is that you can create an annual assessment outside the annual assessment workflow. You can come over here to add new and an assessment, and you can actually create one, and you can date it whatever you want. And that is impacting and has impacted some of the agencies I've worked with, where they've done the annual assessment manually this way, put in a date that is not an allowable date, and thought that they've completed an annual, and they're not sure why it's not showing up on their reports when they go to update things. Okay. All right. So then the last few items that we're going to cover is data congruence. And this is a real big one when it comes to the reports, especially. So if health insurance on the HUD program assessment, so if you're going to look at an assessment, we'll go check out the HUD program assessment again. So if you're doing a health insurance assessment and you say no here, well, then during a program enrollment, the health insurance types, that table that says Medicaid, Medicare, so on and so forth, should not launch if you're doing that during program enrollment. But what has been happening is people are saying yes to health insurance, and then they're saying no to all the health insurance types. And that will cause data incongruence, and then it will throw off a report. So if you have to submit a CAPER, for example, if you're an ESG, if you're an emergency shelter funded through ESG, and you have health insurance incongruence, then that will show as an error. So it's important that if you're yes for health insurance, then on the health insurance assessment, you're picking at least one of those insurance types. Another data incongruence that is happening is with disability. So on the HUD universal assessment, you're answering disabled condition as no, which is fine. But on the HUD program assessment, when you get to the disabling conditions, the types of disabilities, people are answering yes here. Now this data is it's congruent. There's no in the HUD universal, and there's all no's for disability types. But what I've seen people doing is they're saying yes to disabled and leaving all these as no. That will cause an error on any reports. It will show as conditions are going to be either unknown or missing, and it is somewhat of an entanglement, and it is difficult to diagnose until you get used to doing it. But I want to make sure those things are covered before we jump into doing data entry. Another item with these disability types is very often I'll see don't know or unknown, and that might be the case. Emergency shelters especially, you guys are dealing with people right off the street. They're not going to have a lot of good history in most cases, but PSH projects have a little bit more resources at their disposal because they usually have access to the client for a longer period of time, and a lot of times the client has had some level of stability, meaning they're either seeing a psychiatrist or a doctor, so you can get better medical history or psychiatric history. But just be careful in these circumstances when you're saying don't know or refuse. Well, refused is fine. If the client refuses, they refuse. But going with don't know or unknown is something that you're going to want to try to limit to the best of your ability and try to work with the client as much as you can. Even after you do the initial enrollment, it might be unknown or don't know. But if the client's at your shelter for several weeks and is there consistently, see what you can do to try to get that changed by working with the client, and hopefully they've gained access to either medical care or psychiatric care, and you can get an actual diagnosis. But the other key element that I see that I've seen not often, but frequently with some of the data that I've looked at is for mental health as yes, but then the expected to be of long, continued, and indefinite duration and substantially impairing ability to live independently is set to no. And that's something that HUD looks at this value as the real determining factor of whether or not somebody's disabled. So if somebody's mental health problem is substantial enough where they can't live independently, meaning they're not able to maintain a job, they're not able to maintain hygiene, they're not able to maintain, proper diet and nutrition. They're on the street. They've lost their housing, or for whatever reason they're on the street, and now they're at your shelter. It's most likely, if they have a psychiatric diagnosis, that diagnosis and that illness is what's impairing their ability to live independently. Now, if you ask the client that, or the person that, they may say, well, no, it's not impairing me to live independently. But in reality, it most likely is, and they are most likely going to require that their housing opportunity be in a permanent supportive setting where there's case management along with the rental subsidy. So just be careful with that one as well. It's not that it can't happen, that it's a no for impairing the ability to live independently, but in most cases with the mental health diagnosis, it probably is. The other one is chronic conditions. Those are specific conditions: high blood pressure, heart disease, liver disease, heart disease. I think, and if I said that already, but it's those types of chronic conditions. So if somebody is HIV is a yes, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a chronic health condition. So those two do not go hand in hand, and this is common across the country. A lot of people will put both of them together. But if the person has a chronic health condition along with the HIV diagnosis, then that's fine. Obviously, you can say yes to that. But I just want to make sure people understand that chronic health is very specific, and HUD does have a short list of their examples of chronic health. Developmental disability is the last one I'll touch on, is that that is something that is diagnosed usually in the school age years, usually before the age of 18. So if somebody is identified as developmentally disabled, there would hopefully be some track record or history of that you might be able to get. Now, again, with emergency shelters, you don't have the same level of access that you would have once the person's in permanent supportive housing. So if you are going to identify yes for that particular diagnosis, I think the assumption would be that there is some indication, either some history somewhere that shows that the person has a developmental disability. Any questions about those? No? Okay. And again, if that was something you guys were all aware of, great, you're way ahead of the game. Chronic homeless calculation, just to touch on that briefly as well before we talk about any data entry. Chronic homeless calculation is done once at entry, and it's the HUD Universal Assessment, which I'm guessing most of you are familiar with. You do get the chronic homeless value here based on the responses that are provided. So the first thing that has to be true in order for the calculation to even begin to assess the remaining data is that disabling condition has to be yes. You have to have a homeless history of that 12 months or more, and the 4 or more times in as well to get that chronic homeless condition to be a yes versus a no. So I always the HUD APR, for example, even though you're an emergency shelter, if you want to know how many chronic homeless clients you're serving, the HUD APR, which is one of the regular reports available in HMIS, will give you a count of chronic homeless individuals and chronic homeless households that you're serving. If you want to keep track of something like that, it is helpful to know because there's a lot of projects out there, permanent supportive housing projects that are chronic homeless only, or any turnover beds they have to go to a chronically homeless person. So if you're able to have a quick glance of who HMIS has indicated as chronically homeless, that might help when you're doing the application process, or when your coordinated access system is up and running. It'll also be helpful there to determine what type of housing the person might be available to access. Okay. And enrollment ID. Probably one of the more important HMIS related values is this ID number. Not just the client ID. So the client ID is up here in the top left. Enrollment ID, that ID number gets assigned to every enrollment that a client has. And each individual enrollment has its own ID number. If you see duplicates, then there's something going on that needs to be fixed. But for the most part, so Kim Wilson Housing, this enrollment has one ID. There's a duplicate here. There's probably something going on with that because it's assessment pending. And then there's a separate Kim Wilson Housing for a different program in Kim Wilson Housing, so that gets its own ID number. And then the coordinated entry, there's a test ID, and there's an ID number for that. Why that number is important is when you create a program enrollment for a client, for a household, for anybody in the household, that ID number is attached to every event in HMIS. It's attached to the assessment, it's attached to the services, it's attached to the enrollment, as we see here. So all of you right now currently have the power to delete an enrollment. And one of the big cleanups that I've been doing with a lot of agencies is resolving deleted enrollments that left behind a lot of junk data because you're not able to delete assessments and in some cases services. So I ask you to hesitate or at least give pause if you're going to delete an enrollment, and make sure if you need an enrollment deleted that you submit an email to Sherry or myself or Henny, and we'll look over the enrollment and we can actually delete it for you, because we'll be able to delete everything, not just the enrollment. So if you feel that an enrollment needs to be deleted, all you need to do is send an email saying, hey, I need for client ID 641648, I need enrollment ID 2933239 deleted. We'll evaluate it. We'll make sure that that makes sense. And if it does, then we'll go ahead with the deletion of the enrollment, assessments, and services. If we see that, maybe that enrollment is actually a better enrollment than one that you might want to leave behind, then we'll say, hey, you know what, this enrollment actually looks really complete. This other enrollment looks more incomplete. We'll delete that one and keep this one, and then we can have that dialogue. The nice thing about Caseworthy, if you delete something, it's 100% retrievable. So if you do a delete at this level, so here, if you delete it here, it would go up to this teardrop in the top right into this recycle bin. Okay? And if there were any deleted enrollments, they'll show in this recycle bin and they can be restored. For this particular client, there just aren't any deleted ones. So then I would be able to restore that. It would restore the enrollment, and then we would be able to go in and restore the assessments, and everything would link back together like Legos. So no data would be lost if, for example, an enrollment was deleted in error. But again, it's very important that you resist deleting an enrollment until you've allowed us to take a look at it. Because the other thing the enrollment is attached to is the family. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the family ID, but in family and contacts, you'll see all the families that a particular person is associated with. Now, for example, this test client is only part of one family, and it's family ID 494787. I'm going to show you just a different view of why that number is important. So from my view, wait till that loads, I might need to search. I might have moved a little too quick for Caseworthy. There we go. Okay. So from my view, I actually can see the family ID number and the enrollment it's associated with. And what's really, really important, if you have a client who's in more than one household, that you be very careful about what enrollment ID you feel needs to be deleted. If you delete an enrollment that's associated with a household that isn't the one you thought it was, it will cause a lot of problems for that household and the other members. So again, family ID for people in multiple families or more than one family, and enrollment ID, very important. If you're not sure if your client is in more than one family, you can always go to Case Management, Family and Contacts, and you'll see if there's more than one family listed here. And the last thing I'll say about families is this: it's perfectly allowable by HUD, by funders, by HMIS for a client to be a member of more than one family. And especially after a database conversion, you may find that your client that, back when you were in your previous system was only part of one family that you knew of, but now in HMIS or in Caseworthy, they're showing up as being in more than one family. And when you look under their name here, you're seeing all these people, but you only work with this client. Just because you're seeing all these people doesn't mean they're enrolled in your program. It just means that they're associated with that family. So this client that I'm looking at, my test client, is the only one in the household, for example, with this enrollment. So all that means is this family member, this person, is enrolled in my project and the other members are not. And that's fine. That could be the reality. But if you feel that is not correct, if you go to, you look under this person's name, you see the other's members here, and you're like, this person has never ever been with these people. We have to fix that. We would have to go in and take a look at the family and contact history. We would have to look and see if there's 2 family ID numbers. If there happens to be 2 family ID numbers, we have to investigate to see if those that other family is a legitimate family and if it should remain or not. I have seen in some cases people click on the family, they see it here. You do have edit ability here when you look at this family. You can click on this, for example, and people are putting in end dates and they're removing the family member from the household. That removes the member enrollment, the program enrollment, and now has essentially, in a way, orphaned the client in the system. So it's really important that if you think somebody is part of an incorrect household or is part of a family that they shouldn't be, send in the email, provide the family ID number, and say this client is part of 2 families, 494-787, 494-788, and we think they should only be part of 494-787. Can you please clean this up? And we'll do that for you. What I found is because of the state of the conversion, a lot of agencies have taken it upon themselves to end those family, put end dates on those families and inadvertently killed a lot of the enrollments. And then the family member either disappears from view, the enrollment disappears from view, and the client no longer shows up on a funder report. Okay. Let me see if there's any other landscape items I wanted to go through. We'll go through that if you all have questions. We'll go through adding a member and removing a member after we look at enrollments. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff I just covered?
Sounds good. I know that I was guilty of deleting some enrollments early on because of when we got the conversion and uploaded all the other data, there was some that didn't make sense or there were some duplicates.
Yep.
So I was guilty of deleting a few, but haven't since. So.
Yeah, that's fine. It's the same thing that happened with Connecticut post-conversion. We have a lot of strong users in Connecticut, just like Kansas City. A lot of people that are very savvy, and the delete abilities were there at first conversion for us as well. And being new to Caseworthy back in 2014 or so, we didn't necessarily grasp the full impact of giving that power to end users. And people did that. They deleted enrollments that they thought were invalid, and it was only upon investigation we realized what was going on, and we actually took that that feature away, not because the users were doing something terrible. They were being prudent and doing their due diligence to try to clean up their data. It's just a powerful step, and it's a powerful feature. And I know a lot of people, a lot of you had to resort to some rapid cleanup. So it's not a big deal. It's easy to fix if it causes a problem. Like I said, it goes into this recycle bin. If it's not showing up there, a lot of times we can retrieve it as well. It's something that'll happen, but now going forward, you guys have an outlet. You can let us take a look at it before any steps are taken. Okay. Any other questions before we jump into the program enrollment steps? Okay, so some things to talk about for emergency shelter. So for Shalom House, for example, is your emergency shelter set up as, and you may or may not know the answer to this, and I can provide more info. Do you know if you're set up as a night-by-night shelter or an entry-exit shelter?
I think it's because we don't have to re-enroll people every day.
Okay.
That makes sense. So
Yep.
it's set up that, because the one part about today I want to learn about, this is kind of a long, convoluted answer to your question, but about the resources and checking them into beds.
Yep.
So we're kind of okay with that, but there's some glitches. So the way when we assign them to a resource that adds a bed night every night automatically, it automatically enrolls them night to night.
Yeah.
Because we kind of straddle between emergency shelter and transitional living, that there's really not a time period on how long they can stay with us.
Yeah.
So we don't, of course, we reserve that bed for them every night. So that kind of answers.
Okay, so if the person doesn't sleep in the bed, they're on the bed list, but they don't get a check-in. Is that correct?
Well, they automatically, I think we set it up where they automatically check in every night, like at 8 or 10 o'clock or something like that.
Okay, so what's because I want to actually look at the program setup, but it's not. Is it this one here, the Catholic Charity?
Actually, it's emergency shelter, I believe.
Okay.
Because we have 3 different program enrollments for that program.
Is it like Catholic Charities Emergency Shelter or?
Yes, CCNEK-emergency shelter.
Got it. Okay. CCNEK dash. Let's see.
I saw it a second ago when you had it up on there.
Yeah. Let's see. Geez, it should be alphabetical here. Let me try it this way. Just pull that. There it is. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the setup real quick. Oh yeah, you're night by night, so you do have a bed list. You're open. That's good. Okay. All right. Catholic Charities. And your CCNEK.
Northeast Kansas.
Yep. Shalom. There's your Shalom house. Okay. So you have all these beds, 21 beds? Okay, 24 beds, all right. Let me just see the 24. Okay, and when you're evaluating a report, your shelter, do you run any reports to take a look at your bed nights or your services, anything like that?
Yes. Every month I need to turn in a list of my bed nights. And one thing I've been trying to figure out how to do is also auto-populate meals. Because every night the guy gets a dinner. So that's one thing that down the road I'd like to be able to add. But I always need to report bed nights, meals. So we usually just do like a service summary, but I've been kind of messing around with some of the reports to see clients and program reports, try to get a nightly census, that kind of thing.
All right. So you have a setup, you're saying, where the system automatically checks the client in for you, so you don't have to go to resources, click the gear next to the resource, and click check in, and then add the person to the bed. You don't have to do those steps?
Well, we have to do it the first time, but then every night that person's in there, it checks them in and reports the bed night.
Okay.
And we did that, I know before Helen left, we met with, I can't think John's wife's name, over at City Union Mission.
Yeah.
But we sat down with them and they kind of helped us learn how to do some of that stuff.
Okay.
So it kind of works.
Okay, so that's good. I'd be interested to to look at that as well for Crossroads, because they have a bed list, and right now they're doing the check-ins manually. So I guess but for Shalom, so if the person doesn't sleep there, what do you do? Do they still get an automatic check-in?
Correct. So if for some reason a guy just doesn't come in that night, usually we give them one night before we totally exit them from the program.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would probably just add a bed night.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so that's technically fine, especially if you're a shelter that assigns the bed to the person and only that person can have the bed. But for a shelter where people kind of come and go as they please, then it does skew utilization if you're trying to get a grasp of actual utilization for a particular time period. So, for example, if you needed to know specifically or exactly how many people were physically in one of your beds, from August 1st to August 31st, you would probably show 100% utilization, I'm assuming, all the time. If after first manual check-in, the person just gets a check-in each time via the system doing it. And again, for length of stay shelters and shelters where there's that type of bed assignment, in general, that's allowable. And I know for Salvation Army Crossroads, because I just worked with them on their bed lists, they're currently doing manual check-ins, but that's why I want them to chime in if they could. So for your bed assignments, only those people who have the bed, they're going to get that same bed the next night, or that family is going to get the same unit the next night?
Kathy just slipped out for a minute. This is Elise talking, but yeah, it's odd because we have the 9 rooms, and then there's so many beds per room, but that doesn't mean that's always filled. And then sometimes we have pack and plays or cribs in those rooms that kind of mess it up. So we're having a real struggle trying to get that figured out, because actually even yesterday when we were trying to do check-ins, they were filling in beds in other rooms that were empty for some of our people, but that doesn't work.
You can change that. You can change, you can edit those. It's just going to auto-populate, but then you just click the magnifying glass and you can change that. Now, also the way yours is set up, the system, it for reporting purposes, it doesn't necessarily, honestly, really matter what bed somebody sleeps in. The way the report will work is, or the way the system will look at it, it's going to identify families by the family ID number. So you'll know how many families you serve based off of that ID number. So if you have, let's say, 2 families in your shelter and you have 2 units, you put family 1 in unit 1, family 2 in unit 2. Well, on paper, that looks fine. But the reality is, when you put the person in the bed, you could put, a member of family 1 in unit 2 and a member in family 2 in unit 1, and the system will still know which families those 2 people belong to. We can always add like overflow beds to a unit if you have, for example, 7 household members versus 6. So those kind of things. And again, those beds are editable. You can, so for example, if the system gives you the next available bed of unit 2, bed 1, when you really need this person in unit 1, bed 6, you can change that as long as unit 1, bed 6 is open. Now, as far as utilization goes for families, HUD looks at HUD looks at unit utilization versus bed utilization, because HUD understands that just because you have 6 beds in a unit doesn't mean you're going to have 6 family members in that unit. So you're not expected to have a bed utilization of 100%. You are expected to have a unit utilization as close to 100% as possible. So there's those dynamics. And HMIS also has a crib versus a bed. So if you know that a particular unit has 1 crib and always has 1 crib versus 6 beds, it's 5 beds and 1 crib, you can set it up that way in HMIS as well. All I have to do is change the bed label to crib, and then that unit will have 5 beds and 1 crib. So as you guys work with this, just if something doesn't look right, you're not sure how it functions, just send an email. We'll do a quick screen share and we'll resolve it and you know, make it match reality as much as possible.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yep, go ahead.
That was the problem we had yesterday, trying to go backwards to fill those in because of the times. Like you put a family from room 1 into room 3 because we had to, but then those time frames are different because it's all staggered, of course. You know, each room has staggered. Now you also have a full family in there, but that person that we slipped in there retroactive now cannot be in that room. So that's the problem we were having yesterday.
Yeah, and were you not able to change the bed assignment?
Yeah, we had a little problem, and then as we were trying at the end, rooms 8 and 9 did not have. It was not set up the same. It was just numbers of beds instead of a unit.
Well, now for the 2 shelters now you have actual so like the units, those are all inactive now. It's all under one resource. So, but we should we'll set up time. If we have a little time afterwards, we'll put your project up on the screen and we'll look at it. And if we don't get to it today, we'll set up time for early next week to do a screen share and evaluate.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Yeah. That'd be good.
Yep. All right, so I'll put a note. And I can actually take a look at the bed list as well in between now and then. All right, so new house, we know that's DV and they're somewhat new to the system. For Johnson County Interfaith Hospitality Network, how are you guys doing your data entry for bed nights and things like that? Are you a night by night or an entry exit setup, you know?
I'm brand new, so I have no clue.
Well, then, good for you for saying that, because I'd rather you say that than try to make up an answer. Yeah, so being brand new is one of the fun things. It's always fun to be brand new to a database. One second. Let me pull that back up. So we can actually take a quick look. Let's see if I can pull that one up. It was Johnson County. I'll see if they come up. If we don't get to that one quick, I won't waste too much more time on it. I'll take some time to look for it because I have a list of all the, it's not jumping up. Yeah, we'll look at that after and we'll see what your setup is. And then restart. Do you know what your setup is?
Yeah, we have an entry exit.
Okay. And it's for, just let me know when I come to it.
I think there's quite a few, but for the emergency shelters, it should say family, probably AES. There's a youth program.
Okay. Is the youth program an RHY funded youth program? Or around homeless youth?
I'm not sure about the youth funding. I only know about the adult emergency and the family, but there's one of them.
Yeah. Your emergency shelter. Yeah, your entry exit. So you don't have, you may have a bed list, but it's not what triggers your services. What triggers your services is the enrollment start date and the enrollment end date. So let's make a note of that. That was what the men's shelter we just looked at. Adult. Okay. The reason why I want to get those sort of determinations is as we're talking about program enrollment, the experience is going to be slightly different for a night by night and for a entry exit. Okay. All right. So you have 2 choices here. If you're pretty savvy, you're pretty comfortable with doing a program enrollment, you can just watch as I go through it. If you're fairly new to the process and you want to practice, then I definitely recommend you create a test client and you do a program enrollment. And then that way you can get a feel for the flow of the system and the types of questions and how to respond to those questions. So I'm just going to do an enrollment for my test client into Salvation Army's independent project, into their independent core provider. So again, if you get, if I move too fast, or if you're on a screen that's different than mine, or something happens you don't recognize, then just feel free to stop me and somebody in the room can give you a hand. Okay. But to add a client to any enrollment, you're just going to hit Add Client and then click on HMIS Intake. And this will bring you to the demographic screen, essentially, is how you can refer to it. And I'm just going to put in my test first and last name. Always check for duplicates. It's a required step. And the most important step after you click check for duplicates is that if your client is located, that you actually select that person from the list. The system is going to bring up anybody with a name that is similar to the name that you put in. And just make sure that as you look through the list that you find the one that most closely resembles your client. Mine happens to be this one. So I'm going to click on that client, and any existing data that's in the system for this particular screen will auto-populate. You just have to validate if it's all still correct. For example, you see you have race here is white and ethnicity is client doesn't know. So in this case, let's assume that we've gotten that information and we want to update it. So I'm going to say that non-Hispanic or Latino for this client because we've been able to identify by talking to them what the ethnicity should be. Current address, if that's different than what's currently in the system, go ahead and update that. Then you have to click Verify Address. It is required. I do want to talk a little bit about Social Security number. Because what I've seen in some cases is that the client doesn't have a Social Security number. So users are putting in all zeros, but leaving full SSN reported. That's going to cause a data congruence error. HUD knows and HMIS knows on the reporting side that 000000 is not a valid Social Security number. So it'll show up as an error and it'll have to be fixed. So if you have the Social Security number, put it in and you identify full SSN reported. If you don't have it, then don't put anything in the SSN field. You would just put data not collected or client refused, client doesn't know, and this will shade out. It'll make it so you can't edit it. Okay, so that's real important that don't put in all zeros and say full SSN. If you don't have it, just say client doesn't know or refused, and then you can move forward, okay? Date of birth, obviously, if you have full date of birth, and full name, defaults to full name because the assumption is you have that. But if you don't, then you would change it to one of the partial responses. But in the most cases, people have that. All right. So try to have, whenever possible, full name, full date of birth, and social. Social is the one, especially for small children, you might not be able to get, so you can just say data not collected. Address, as I said, make sure it's correct. Click verify. You have two choices here. You can make verify not mandatory, or you can just click on the shaded box to verify the address, and you're done. And then you can hit save at the bottom. One thing I want to point out as well, I'm going to reduce my screen. Now, if you notice, it looks like there's no save button in the bottom right. That's because my screen is not fully expanded, okay? This is something you definitely want to do with Caseworthy. Once you start the enrollment, always expand your screen to full screen. So you're making sure you're seeing everything, right? Once I'm comfortable with it, I'm going to hit save. One other thing I'm going to point to is this shared, not shared. If you change this to not shared, you are going to hide the client from virtually everybody outside of your agency. If that is your practice, I would just say make sure that it's something that you've discussed with the continuum, that they know that you're going to make all your clients not shared. Moving to Caseworthy is essentially a commitment to moving to an open system, unless you're a DV project, that's a totally different story. Or an RHY, Runaway Homeless Youth, they have different security settings. But for the most part, you're going to want to leave this as shared. So as you move to a coordinated access network or coordinated entry network, that the data is available and the most accurate data is available to help house the client as quickly as possible. All right, so once I've gone through that, I'm going to hit save. Okay, now you're going to get a listing of either just one client name here, your actual client, but you may also see other clients listed. These are other members who've historically been enrolled with this client. It doesn't mean that they're going to be in your particular enrollment, okay? If these are not going to be in your particular enrollment, you don't have to do anything here. This is the family member screen. you can just leave this as is, all right? If for some reason, though, a family member is missing, and all you need to do is click Add Row, and then you can add that family member to this particular household. If everybody is present, you don't need to do anything. And if everything is correct here, birth dates, things like that, you don't need to do anything, okay? Now, for example, if I saw this birth date of 1901, and a person's 117, number one, I would make sure I give Guinness a call, because I have a feeling that 117 is the oldest person on earth right now. I think the last person was like 121. I think they passed away recently. So you may have, some newsworthy information here. Otherwise, you could assume that that date of birth is incorrect. And you can go ahead and you can change that by just clicking the box. It'll open the field and you can edit the date of birth, okay? But if everything is fine here, then you can just save right past it. All right, this is the program enrollment screen. So you're gonna have your family name here, your start date. Very important that you pay attention to these pre-populated date fields, because the person may not have started in your project on 8/29. Everybody gets busy. When you get time to actually do your enrollments in HMIS, it might have been 6 days later. This person may have entered on 8/23. I'm gonna say August 1st, just for the sake of giving me a little bit of a gap between start date and today. Project exit, you just have to click in this box and it'll auto-populate an exit date that Caseworthy, the system, recognizes as open. 12/31/9999 is the system's code for an open enrollment. All right, that's all that's telling you. And then for project, you have to make sure that you add them to the correct project here. So in this case, I'm in Salvation Army, and I'm going to see all the projects available under Salvation Army. So I'm going to just put them in the Crossroads Family Shelter. Account, you don't have to do anything. You guys don't have any account set up. All right. So once that's done for this family, you have the right start date. You've opened the end date. You never put an end date in the project exit screen during the enrollment. That will screw up the enrollment. So you just leave it as the 12/31/999, which it pre-populates just by clicking that. All right. And then hit save. Now the next screen is going to be asking you, of those family members that exist in this household, how many of them, if any, are going to join this person in the enrollment? And in this case, I'm just going to say that this client and this client are the only two that are going to be part of the enrollment, okay? I'm going to put in the head of household, and I'm going to put in the child, all right? Now also note, as soon as you hit that checkbox, the date defaults to today's date. You want to make sure that that date reads the date that that child joined the family. And in this case, I'm going to say it's 01/20/18, the same date as the parent, and I'm going to go ahead and click that to open. All right. The relationship to head of household is self. That's the system's method of identifying who the head of household is. And the child is child. The information pre-populated because these people are already members. But if it was not correct, I would just click the drop down and change it to whatever it should be. Okay. And then hit save. Now the system is going to allow me to do assessments on both the head of household and that child record. Okay, so this is the copy previous feature. This will allow you to copy assessment data that exists in the system on this particular client. If you look up, even though it's shaded now, you can see the client I'm in. I'm in my client test, okay? So that's telling me who I'm working on, and in this case, that's the head of household. It's asking me if I want to copy the assessment data for this particular person. If I have that option, I'm going to say yes, and then done. And now it's going to give me both members to go ahead and look for assessment data. So I'm going to look for assessment data on both of them, all right? And I'm going to click the magnifying glass to go look, and I'm going to find that there is this path entry back in July of 2018, not too long ago, a little over a month, so the data is probably pretty accurate. Coordinated entry might not be as accurate. They have different assessment information but a path enrollment is somewhat similar, so there's a good chance I'm going to grab a lot of good data. The other thing to look at is the type. If there's an entry and an exit, and I'm doing an entry, I'm going to always pick the entry over the exit. If all there is an exit, that's fine. It's just that not every set of exit assessment lines up with an entry, so you're going to have some blank fields that you're probably going to have to populate with entry data. So in this case, I'm going to select the path entry to copy for that client, and then for the child, I'm going to see what it finds when I do the search. Oh, did it go? Oh, it's going to, hopefully it's not going to crap out on me now. It's maybe I'll stop it from looking. Let's see if it goes. Yeah, it's not. All right, so I'm just gonna, there might not be anything for the child for that particular test client. So I'm gonna copy assessment, and it should pull in. You have to give it a second, but it should pull in the data for the head of household. That child record, there just might not have been any assessments that were available. So just because you've copied the data doesn't mean it's good data. For example, client location is always going to call up the last location where the client was. You're going to want to change that. So I'm going to hit the magnifying glass because the client location has changed. They're now going to be in my Salvation Army Independent Corps. That's the provider location, just so you know. And then disabling condition. In this case, I'm going to say that we've determined that this person is actually disabled. Type of residence, prior. So this is where were they on the night prior to your program, and then I'm going to leave it as emergency shelter. We're going to say this client was at another shelter, now they're at this shelter. I'm going to change this because it's now the last length of stay, I'm going to say was, let's say they did 1 year or longer. And I'm now going to change this start date because length of stay prior living situation was an emergency shelter for 1 year or longer. Approximate date of homelessness then has to change to at least a year ago. Because if they're saying they were at an emergency shelter for a year, then they've been homeless for a year. So I'll say 07, 01, 201, 7. All right. And then regardless of where they stayed last night, number of times the client has been on the streets, in emergency shelter or safe haven in the past 3 years. So in this case, we got some better data from the client, and we're going to say that it's actually 4 or more times. Now total number of months. So we now know that the client's length of stay prior at emergency shelter was 1 year or longer, and we know that their homelessness start date was July 1/17. We can now say that their homeless history is more than 12 months. This should now show that this client is chronically homeless. And I'm going to hit save. Okay. Now you can see we're on the child record for the universal assessment. We just completed the universal assessment for the parent. Now the universal assessment looks very different for the child. All the homeless history goes with the head of household, and this child only has to answer for the child. You're only answering if they're disabled or not. And in this case, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to hit save, and that's going to take us to the program assessment next. Okay. So you can see in my adult member, the HUD program assessment, you have your assessment date up here. Again, I should have pointed that out in the first assessment, but I want to point it out too. You have the start date and the program. The history on this client is that they have domestic violence history, when it experienced, and if they're currently fleeing. We're going to say all that's the same. But now if you recall, in the HUD universal assessment, we found out that the client is actually disabled. And we're going to make sure we have to identify, if we're saying they're disabled on the HUD universal, we have to, one of these has to be true. And in this case, we're going to say that this one is the true disabling condition, and then I'm going to hit save. And now this should bring us to the child record for the disabling condition history. Now, another thing you might notice is that the... Go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question about that? So if you don't know at intake about disability, but you do your 30-day assessment or whatever, is your expectation that they go back to the original assessment and change that disability, even though the information was new?
Yeah, because if they were disabled, you find out that they had a disabling condition 30 days later, it was probably true 30 days prior.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you would edit the entry assessment in that case.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that too once we're done with the enrollment on editing and assessment. So the other thing I want to point out for those of you who have entry-exit shelters, you may or may not have noticed that the HUD program assessment for the adult did not show non-cash benefit or health insurance. For night-by-night shelters, even ESG-funded night-by-night shelters, the health insurance and the non-cash benefit questions are not required by HUD. And this is something we'll have to talk about with Salvation Army because they do submit a CAPER. And when their CAPER report gets submitted, the system that it gets submitted to is going to recognize that they're night by night, and it's not going to evaluate non-cash and health insurance for that particular project type. But if Salvation Army, for example, wants to count that data, they want to capture that, they want to keep track of non-cash and health insurance, and that's something that I can work with them on, and we can set up the project. Maybe we go back to type, but keep the resource tables so they can capture that data. I did have a conversation with Shida and did confirm that the night-by-night setup is the one that is identified through the ESG type, but again, it doesn't mean that you can't capture that information if you choose to. But the out-of-the-box setup for HUD spec is as a night-by-night, you don't need to capture that. For entry-exit, you will see non-cash and health insurance come up in the HUD program assessment. All right, so this is the HUD program assessment for the child, and the only questions that come up for the child are the disability types. So we're going to say no for all of these because we said the child was not disabled in the HUD universal assessment. And then hit save. Okay, now income. For this particular client, we're going to assign them an income. But let's say they didn't have income. One thing I've seen is that people have had the financial assessment where they're yes for income, but no income types, where income types are 0. They've said like SSI, but kept the value 0 and hit save. That will give you invalid data. If a person truly has no income, then you're going to say no income up here. And then save no income will be your option. If the person does have an income, you're going to say yes. And we're going to say SSI for this particular client. It's just telling they have to enter a value and 735. Now, I want to talk a little bit about SSI and SSD. A common mistake, and I know a lot of you are probably very well aware of this, but I have seen this a few times as well. I'm seeing SSD values of the current SSI allotment, and I'm seeing SSI values that are clearly somebody who is getting SSD. So just make sure your staff who are doing data entry are versed in the difference between the two. The dollar amount is usually the first indicator if they don't have like the TPQY or the copy of Social Security check right in front of them, what the current SSI amount is, and that way they'll be able to tell. So the client may say, oh, I get SSDI, but in reality it's SSI. Just be on the lookout for that, and then hit save once you have that. Now, you can see that the financial assessment does open for this particular child. Children, you do not assess income, so you're going to say no for income. I'm going to switch my income from any source to no as soon as it updates. There we go. And then you're going to hit save no income. The AMI field for both will pre-populate. If it's not one of the pre-populated values, you can change it to what it should be. I do not know how your AMI tables break out. Hopefully you all do know based on your jurisdiction which one you should be filling. If not, then somebody from Mark can probably identify that for you, or somebody at your agency may know. But again, for this particular client, I'm saying no for income because it's the child. And like I said earlier, if this child was getting SSI because they were disabled, I would not enter it here on their financial table. I would enter it on the adult household members financial table. And then I'm going to save no income for the child. Okay. Now you were on the insurance, yes or no. So it will still open, even though for a night-by-night shelter in the HUD program assessment, you don't identify, you don't get the question of yes or no for health insurance, but you do get the opportunity to identify, to assign a health insurance type. So it does give you that, but you have no way to assign anything for non-cash benefits like food stamps, for example. That does not appear for night by night in the HUD program. The child, and we'll say the child's got the state, click on that, the state health insurance, and save that. Okay. Now, depending on your shelter setup, will depend on what field or what tables come up after the HUD health insurance assessment. This one pre-populates the self-sufficiency score. This is something we don't have in Connecticut, so it does come up on the workflow. I don't know if this comes up on other workflows for all of you. Do people do this assessment in Kansas City? No? All right, so if you don't do it, it's fine. You can just save right past it. And for the child, same thing, just save past it. Now you're going to see your available bed lists, okay? So if you have a bed list set up, you're going to see the reservation screen is going to come up. And this will show you all the reservation screen, or all the reservation, or all bed lists that you have available. We're going to be enrolling in the Salvation, well, I'm going to actually enroll in one of the empty ones that we're not currently using, just so we don't put them. So we'll use this inactive one. Maybe I'll do this one. We'll do 9. Okay. So I'm going to go to this particular bed list to add these 2 members. Just click on the gear next to them, and they'll pop right up for you. You can just put the checkbox next to them. Again, the thing to notice is that it pre-populates today's date. I want to actually date that back to actual start date. And this will only come up, and you can see that the open date defaults to that 12/31/9999. This will come up when you have bed lists assigned to your particular provider, which is what is under your username in the top right, okay? So once I've done that, it brings me back to this screen. The next step you can do, it does allow you to do a check-in if you want. I don't recommend that. I recommend you add them to the bed list, and then when it comes time to do the check-in to ensure that they actually spent the night at the shelter, that's when you do it, which would probably be the next morning, for example. So you can click done in the bottom right. Okay, this is for a veteran. So if your household member is a veteran, you can add veteran info here by clicking there. And this will bring you to the veteran assessment table, okay? The theater of operations should filter based on the dates of service, all right? So as you put in your dates of service, the other, like World War II should fall away if you have things for, you know, early 2000, you know, for desert, for enduring freedom and some of the other Afghan and Iraqi related conflicts. You have to have branch of military, discharge status, date of service, entry, date separated from service, and then once you have that, you're going to have to know which theater of operations they participated in, okay? I'm going to leave that blank for now. I'm going to just cancel out of here. But it's important that if you do have a veteran that you identify that veteran here, and then just say done. Okay. Now you're on the services spreadsheet, all right? So if your particular shelter does specific services, like Catholic Charities does meals, for example, you can actually, if you've already provided a meal to that family for this particular day, you could add the meal here just by hitting search, and any available services associated with your particular project will come up. Now, for this case, there's bed nights, and then the rest of the services here. So if Salvation Army wants other services assigned, we could certainly do that. But they don't have meals assigned to their particular project. And you would not add bed nights here, okay? This will not give you a bed night check-in. You can only trigger the bed night check-in by actually doing the check-in. So definitely don't select bed nights if you open your services list to do like utility assistance or some other assistance. I'm assuming through their ESG funding, they can probably provide some of those other assistances. But if Catholic Charities, for example, they would see the meal option here. I'm going to cancel here because I'm not going to assign any services at entry. You have other opportunities to assign services post-enrollment. Now the next screen we've come to is case notes. If your agency does so, you can assign a case note at entry. You don't have to do it, and it's available post-enrollment as well. So I'm going to say done. All right, now you're at your done screen. This shows you everything you've completed. Then you just have to hit done again, and your enrollment is complete. You can go to project enrollment, and you're going to see that your client is enrolled in Salvation Army Crossroads Family Shelter as of 8/1, the provider name they're enrolled under, family name, and the enrollment ID. We do have to talk about one-time fields for a second for emergency shelters. Date of engagement is the date where you started essentially working with the client. So whatever date that was, it may be different than the program enrollment start date. Let's go 7/01/2018. It should allow. It's not going to allow date of engagement. All right. So it wants it between your start date. 02/2018. So we're going to say it's a day later. I'm going to find out about that because I'll check what our setup is. But essentially, the date of engagement is they're looking for you to track that initial contact. And then going forward, any contacts or communications or case management meetings you have with the client, you can collect in general services, okay? So you have your enrollment, you have your enrollment ID, which is now assigned to this particular client and this particular household. Now, as we talked about member enrollment. So I'm gonna go click here and I'm gonna go look at the member enrollment. And you'll see that you'll have enrollments for the head of household and the child, 8/1 and 8/1, and so you know that you'll be able to see each of their member start dates. If you want to look at their family setup, you can go to Family and Contacts, and you'll see the family setup for this particular household. And if you recall, there's 3 members here, but only 2 of them are enrolled in this particular project. Again, so this is fine. So the grandparents here, we're going to assume that the grandparent just didn't get enrolled in this particular enrollment. You don't end the grandparent here. You don't put an end date here or anything. They're still in the system as part of the household. They're just not part of this program enrollment. The program enrollment is what triggers the data being assigned to your particular agency. Just because you see them up here does not mean that grandparent is going to show up on your reports. They have to have an enrollment to do that. Okay, assessments. You can look at the assessments for a particular client. Go to assessments, go to HUD assessments dashboard, and it'll bring you to the table of assessments. So HUD Universal, okay, so you can see your entry assessment for, we're in the head of households record here, we're in the parents record, and we're looking at their assessment, and you can actually go in and edit if you need to. So for example, if new information came in and you needed to change something here, you could. You don't have to change the date or anything. This is assuming that something changed at entry. If something changed after entry that has nothing to do with entry, then you would either do a during program assessment or you're doing an annual assessment, and both have specific steps that you would not do here. The only way you would come to this screen is if you were going to edit the entry assessment for some reason. And then you could look at the other assessments as well. And again, if you had to update something, you could. So for example, as the example we had out there, that you found that there was a disability type that you became aware of several days after enrollment. Well, you could, so let's say we found out that this person has a substance abuse problem of drugs and alcohol, then you could add it here. And it will assign that to the project entry, to the entry assessment. Okay. If you need to look at the child record, you just click on the people icon in the top left, you go to the child record, and this will bring you to everything associated with the child. You'll see all the child assessments that way. Okay. What's real important with HMIS is make sure you're always set to your org, the provider that you're enrolling the client under, and obviously your role for most of you is case manager or some of your sysadmin. But it's just important for especially emergency shelters, and if you have a resource or a bed list, you have to be set to case manager because that's the only way the resource option is visible for you. And if you recall, we assigned these people to bed 9, so you could actually even go look at the reservation, and you'll see that they're there as available for a check-in. Okay. And then, as I said, other than making sure you're under the correct provider and role, anytime you're working on a particular client record, always make sure you're under the client that you want to do updates for. So make sure you're in the head of household if that's how you need to edit, or you're in the child if you need to edit the child. Okay. So for an entry, for a night-by-night shelter, if you had to do a check-in, let's say that they spent the night on August 2nd, you would come to resources, you would find the resource you added them to, in this case, or bed list. The system calls it a resource, but it's a bed list. Click the gear, and you would go to slot check-in. And then you would change the date to the date where you want to check them in. So I'm going to say it was August 2nd. And you'll see anybody who's available for check-in for Unit 9 on August 2nd. I'm going to say both of them were. And then you save it. And this will create what's known as a bed night service. And to see that, you would go to Case Management and then Services. And you can see that there's a bed night for this particular client. And then for the child record as well. I have to look and see why it created that blank one there. And then you can look at services here and you'll see the client has one. So if you saw something like this, for example, this one that doesn't have a project assignment, that would be a reason to email either myself or Sherry Henny, and we would fix that for you, clear that out for you. But that's indicating that a service was created. Oh. All right. Any questions on enrollments, assessments, or bed list?
I have a small question just about with the family demographics and stuff. When they have, whether it's a spouse, it used to be on Mac, I think it's spouse/partner, and now it's just a spouse or other member that's not related.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of people that have been together, of course, for many years, but they're not legally married, or you have somebody that just comes in with a new boyfriend. Are we supposed to either have spouse only if they're married? Yes,
that is a spouse's direct indication of legal marriage. If it's not a spouse, then it would be other relative, something like that. Now, that field, let me get to it actually. I can go to it here. That field, HUD only gives specific options. It's not the only options you have to use. So if you wanted something different from caseworthy, for example, if you wanted like partner, or something else to indicate it's a significant other was another one that you could have. But nonetheless, the standard list is the one that you see in caseworthy. HUD updated it, I want to say 15, 16, somewhere in there. And the in caseworthy is just going to follow whatever the HUD minimum recommended standard is. So let's say you want it to show an option for partner. You can certainly add that, but then that has to be mapped to a legitimate option that exists in the database. So partner on the surface would say partner. In the background probably would be mapped to other relative, something like that, for reporting purposes, because the APR is only going to look for a certain set of relationship information. So it's not something you can't have. It's just the sort of the stock responses that HUD provides are the ones that you see.
Okay, so spouse is really just legal marriage then? Yeah,
you would use it for that, and then other relative or other non-relative, either of those two options for a significant other or partner.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yep. All right, any other questions about enrollment or entry assessments, anything like that? Just want to show you real quick, when I talk about enrollment ID numbers, there's a set of tools that we have. So if I look at assessments, for example, you see that the enrollment ID is linked to each assessment. And just like the enrollment itself is a specific enrollment ID number, and it's also a specific family ID number. And yeah, that's why it's important. So you get a glimpse of sort of the back end of this, why it's important to make sure that if you do need to clean something up, that you definitely involve either us or Mark in that, in doing that work with you. So there's other features here. We talked about services. So if you have to assign something other than a bed night to somebody, you would come to services, go to add new, and identify the project, and then search, because services are project specific. Number one, to add a service, the enrollment has to be open. Number two, the project has to have services assigned to it. So if you wanted to assign some utility service here, you could click there, put the date, put the unit value, however you track that. And in this case, a utility water defaults to $. You could actually change that if you wanted, but it defaults to $. You hit save, and it'll generate the service for you. I didn't save that one, but just so you can see it. So you do have, outside the enrollment, you do have the option to add as many services as you provide. You have case note options if you want to use those. They're all valid for maintaining the client record. And then the case note can be available, again, for case management staff to review or supervisory review, things like that. So that's basically it for what you would do with an enrollment, and then any maintenance. So the next thing would be if you have to do an annual assessment for a particular client. And if you're doing a CAPER, for example, you're an ESG funded ES project, you would have to submit a CAPER. And let me just check. I'm almost positive that CAPER does not care about annuals, but let me double check that before I commit to that. No, where's my CAPER? 17. Let's just take a quick look. And if CAPERs don't care about annuals, then you're all set. And again, clients are generally, unless you're a length of stay shelter, you're really not going to get annual data on an emergency shelter client, because they're not, hopefully not going to be, you're going to have housing options for them before a year comes up. Let's see, the income. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about annual updates for CAPERs in that regard. So I won't go through the annual assessment for these particular clients. Is there anything else that you want to see with a particular household other than what we've already showed? I have a couple, I know I've gotten some questions like adding somebody to an existing enrollment, like maybe a child came on afterwards, or exiting somebody who leaves before the household. Do you guys run into that very often? No. Okay. All right. The steps are pretty basic. So if you wanted to add somebody, when I say add somebody, there's probably some qualifications we have to make. First of all, let's say you wanted to add the grandparent. Well, the grandparent's already in HMIS, and they're already linked to the family. So the nice thing is they're automatically available to add to the enrollment without you really having to do anything. You just make sure you're in the How to Households record, go to Program Enrollment, you go click the gear next to Enrolled and go up to Member, and we have workflows for all of this stuff. So then add edit members, and this is going to show you anybody who's considered a member. And so we have this person who's the grandparent, going to hit their checkbox. They're going to be added to the provider. So let's say they came in a little bit later, 03-2018. I'm going to set it to open and then save. So that's one way to add the member to the enrollment. Now the problem is you don't have entry information on that grandparent. So you have a couple options there. You can do those manually, a little bit clunky because you want to make sure that you do all the entry assessments for that particular member. But the other options that you have, let's say, for example, you want to enroll somebody who's not already in the system. So we're going to go to, I'm going to leave those tools up there in case you want to follow along. But so it's case management, then family and contacts. So let's go along with that. All right, so case management, and then family and contacts. All right. And then from there, and this is where it gets, you want to make sure you follow these steps. It's family, then you're going to click the gear next to this family enrollment. Now, you have a few choices here. You want to add and enroll family member, okay? So click that. This will walk you through all the assessment information on that particular member. Before I do that, I actually want to, let me just take this member out because I'll use them as my test. It might not let me go back. Let's see if I can just get in there quick. Because it's going to tell me the person's already enrolled, so I want to actually get rid of, yeah, hold on a second. Get back out of that. Because I want to use them as my test. Let me just take that member out. I'm just going to remove this grandparents enrollment. I think there's none. Okay. All right. So yeah, we're going to go back. So you can see I cleared out that grandparents enrollment just to make it easier to do the workflow for you to see. All right. So go back to that family. Oh, wait a minute. I've got to change my rule. Family and contacts. I'm going to click the gear next to the family I want to work on and add and enroll family member. And then it's going to look like a typical enrollment. It's going to ask you to check for duplicates. And in this case, it's still test, but it's like test LL. So that should come up when I call for it. Yeah, this one here. So yeah, remember this is the person who's 117. So let's say that that's not correct. So we can change that to, I don't know, 1947, something a little more reasonable. All right. And now you can also see that client doesn't know is populated as SSN. Let's say we actually have that now. So we'll go ahead and put that in. Obviously, you would have a value that's real, not that, and so on and so forth. You can edit as you need to. You're going to actually keep in previous because you're not removing them. You're keeping them part of this household. And then just as I didn't do, make sure you expand your window so you can see save. And you're also going to have to do address. Is it going to give me address? No, it didn't. Good. So we should be able to add them without a problem. All right. So now you're going to get to the enrollment screen. And you're going to be asked what program you want to enroll them into. So you would have to find the program you want to add. It'll default the provider and the start date. As usual, you have to identify what your start date is. So I'm going to do that. Your defaulted exit date is there. You can click the star and that'll bring it to present. And then enrollment relation to head of household. You have to fill that out. And we're going to say this is the grandparent. And that's it for that particular screen. You hit save. And this is going to launch you into all the assessments for the grandparent. Now the grandparent's an adult, so you're going to get all the adult data. You say no here. We'll say shelter. We'll just do some quick data here. We're getting close with time. And there, save, because I do want to look at a few reports. What do you got? You're 10, yeah, you're 10:20 there, so actually we're good on time. Forgot I'm an hour ahead of you. No, and we said no. and save. That AMI will pre-populate. We're going to say they have income, and let's say that they get disability, and it's, I don't know, 1,200. Oops. Medicaid. And no self-sufficiency, and add another. So now you get to the end and it's asking if you want to add another enrollment. In this case, the answer to that question is no. That's the only one we wanted to add. Hit save. Okay, and then you're done. Now, if you're an emergency shelter, the one step you still have to do is add to the bed list. And you're going to do that outside of the workflow in this case. So you would go to resources. And then you just add them to the bed list with the other family members, if that's what makes sense for this particular enrollment. And then you just do add row. Oh, sorry, I gotta do my, oh, that should allow for that start date. Let's see, we'll leave it there. And I'm just gonna leave it at this, test and test. It should give me a search, this guy. And it should let me, end date's gotta be fixed. 2, 3, 1, 4. See if it lets me do that. Yeah, let's this it should maybe that did it. And then the enrollment. That's the other one. There you go. And then save. Okay, so it just added that particular household member that you just enrolled, just added them to the bed list with the other members. All right, so now that client is available for check-ins, they're available for services, and they're also available to exit when it's time to exit, should they all need to exit together. All right, and you can see the enrollment here, and if you want to look at all the members enrolled, we can look here. And you'll see their various start dates. You can see the grandparent start date is 2 days after the other members because the grandparent joined late. Now, if you had a 2-day gap, it's up to you on whether or not you would want to have them match dates. If it was, 10, 15, 20-day gap, then yeah, I would have them have their actual. But if it's a 1-day, 2-day difference, that's up to you. It's not going to make a huge difference in the scheme of things. But once you hit 10, 15 days or more, then go with actuals there. So any question about adding? No? All right. I also have the instructions for removing an individual member. It doesn't happen all that often. I'd actually rather go through the full family exit with the, we have a little bit of time to go through that. And then I also wanted to make sure we have time to look at reporting. But these steps are going to be available in the PowerPoint that you guys can evaluate. So let's say, though, we're at the point now where we want to exit everybody. The family's leaving, and there's something to keep in mind depending on the type of emergency shelter that you're operating. And the exit, when you're doing the exit for a shelter where there's a bed list involved, make sure you use the gear for ES exit and exit enrollment with reservation, because that's the only way to remove the person and members from your bed list. At least it's the cleanest way to do it, okay? Start from your head of household record, okay, and click the gear and exit enrollment with reservation. Why this is confusing is you can also get to an exit assessment by clicking the word enrolled, complete exit assessment. You don't want to do that because that is not going to trigger the resource exit. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. So I'm going to exit enrollment with reservation. These are just previous. You can, if you ever have these, you can just delete them. They're just enrollments that either were not completed or started and things like that. So in this case, I'm doing the entire family. And you want to select the entire family and then hit save. All right. And now you're going to see that bed list. Okay. This is the family reservation bed list that I was talking about. You have to supply a date for end date in order to remove them from the bed list. This is a very challenging screen because it really doesn't look like you have to do much, and the save button is active. A lot of people, when they're using bed list, save past this screen. They exit the client, which exits the enrollment ID, but leaves the client on the bed list with that enrollment ID number. Now let's say a month later, the client comes back. They're still on your bed list. You go to enroll them. You don't put them on the bed list because you see them there, and you go and finish your enrollment. That bed list enrollment is tied to an old ID number, an old enrollment ID number. Any check-ins you create are going to be tied to the wrong enrollment. So this is vital that you click these boxes and put in an end date. In this case, I'm going to use today's date. And hit save. Okay, you can copy if you like, say yes to that. I know we have data for this person. I don't know what we have for the others, so I'm just going to stick with this guy. And no, we don't have any exit options, which is fine. Let's use the one that makes the most sense for us. We know that our own entry data is probably the most accurate, so we're going to select that. The only thing we won't have is that anything that's related to exits, those fields are obviously going to be blank because you don't ask exit questions at entry. And then you have to wait. HUD Universal, there's nothing to answer. So you can hit save and go past that. HUD Program is where you get introduced to your first exit assessment questions, and that is where did the person go? That's assuming it populates. And not sure why it froze. Let's see if I can get it. Maybe I can get it to kick on. It should just open for me. I don't know why it's not. It wouldn't be case worthy, I guess, if it didn't have a small glitch along the way. All right. So if you ever run into this problem, the reflex is to come up here and hit X. Don't do that. Come to the teardrop and exit your workflow from here. That's the best way to exit a workflow that isn't launching properly. So I'm going to exit it here, and that's going to kick me all the way back out, okay? And we'll give it one more go. Project enrollment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it without copying because it might have been the copy assessment feature that hung it up. All right, so now you notice this reservation screen is blank. That's because we've already supplied the end dates. If the system still saw the person as open, they would show you that their bed list is still open. That's fine. You can leave it as is because you don't want them open on the bed list. All right, so I'm going to say no, and let's see if we have a little better luck with the assessments firing. I'm going to give it a second. If it doesn't move smoothly this time, I'll pick another record to exit so you can see the exit assessments. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's showing blanks here. Yeah, all of them even. Oh, you know, I see what it did. It's doing the HUD Universal for all three members. There we go. It was back at the original three. That was my mistake. So it did launch. I just had to move three because this is a three-person household, and it was HUD Universal. It was not collected at exit, and it was just cycling through the three members HUD Universals. Now it's going to start with the head of households HUD program assessment. All right. So exit destination is blank. I'm going to say, in this case, let's go for a positive exit. Permanent housing for formerly homeless. The substance abuse and mental health conditions are the same. I'm going to hit save. And now this will bring up the other family members, in this case, the child record. The child presumably is going to the same place. And I didn't copy any assessments, which is why none are coming up. And then the other, the grandparent record will come up. destination, again, we'll have them all going the same. Okay, and then income, again, for the head of household. So if the income is the same, hit the checkbox. If you do this without hitting the checkbox, you're going to get an error. So click on the income to highlight it, that you're keeping it as is, and hit save. And then you're at the child record. We're going to do no income for the child. And then we're going to come to the grandparent record. And we're going to actually create one here. It didn't, because we didn't copy anything, so it didn't bring theirs over. Had we copied an entry assessment, it would have pulled that in. And then insurance is the same for the head of household. And you come to the child record, and you'll have to add that back in if there is some. Hit save. And then the grandparent record, and we'll put Medicare for the grandparent. Say that's what it was at exit. All right, so self-sufficiency you're not going to do. You've already exited them from the bed list, so you just got to cycle through this screen for each member. All right, so now you're exited. This is your last chance to check your dates. Enrollment begin, enrollment end, everything looks fine. Hit save, and then you're done. All right, and you can go check your program enrollment. And you'll see that it shows as exited. You'll see the exit date. Then if you want to check each member, you can just do it here as well. Go up to the member, and it'll show all 3 members, their relation to the head of household, and their exit dates. And you can see those are all the same. You could also go here and look at each one if you wanted. If you want to look at their assessments, you could look at them all there. If you had an issue with an exit assessment, you could go and go to assessments, and you could edit an assessment. For exit assessment, for example, if you realize that you put in a wrong value, you can just go there and update it. So that's entry, that's bed list stuff, that's exits, getting them off the bed list if you have one. And then we've looked at pretty much everything you can do for an ES project. One other thing I want to point out is this assessment pending. I see this often as well. Usually what happened is that somebody's doing an enrollment for some reason, they get interrupted, or maybe something happens, there's a system issue, but the enrollment is left in pending status. To fix this, all you have to do is click the words assessment pending and then complete entry assessment. That will bring you to wherever the assessment left off. You can complete it, and then it'll show as enrolled. All right. Another key for emergency shelters: don't exit a client or household until you're sure all services and bed nights have been recorded. You will not be able to do those services or bed nights if the enrollment is exited. Okay. So just make that one check that you've done all your bed nights before you start the exit enrollment. Now, let's say you forgot to do that. It's not a big deal. All you have to do is click the word exited, click reopen enrollment, and that will reopen the enrollment for you. Now, what's nice about it is the system is going to keep that exit data. So when you finish those check-ins that you missed, you just have to go back and re-exit, and all that data will pre-populate, and you just have to hit save across each screen. Okay, so it's not as dire as it may feel if you have to reopen an enrollment to fix something that you have to then go back and re-exit. You're not going to lose anything, and it's a very quick process. Okay, so just to put your mind at ease there. All right. Any questions about entry, exits, updates, anything that we went through? No?
I have a question.
Sure.
When you touched that teardrop up there and you had, like it was interrupting that workflow or stopping the workflow, we don't seem to have that on ours. When we hit the teardrop, we don't have that option.
You'll only see that save or exit during a workflow.
Oh, okay, so you have to be in it for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what it is. So yeah, this list will change. What's available here will change depending on what screen you're on.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
I think I'll have questions in the future.
Sure.
I'm trying to kind of put some of these things together because when I think I need to work on the setup a little more of how slow in there, because when I went to exit with reservation, it looked a little different.
Okay.
So the guy I had, I was trying to remember, I got some different, let me see here, getting back to this. Okay, so with enrollment, I only had like 4. I had an assessment, add self-sufficiency assessment, Eric Lloyd Long, and then define exit date. And then when I clicked save or tried to move, it gave me the big error screen. So I think some of ours might be, I need to work on the setup a little more, the internal.
Yeah, if it might be that you would use the complete exit assessment versus the exit with enrollment. So what I'm going to do is, I made a note, I'm going to do a test enrollment and exit at for your emergency shelter. And I'll see what what I come up with when I do that.
Because I was doing this big long workaround that I would enroll them in a program, and then I would go to so I did not put them in a bed at that point, but then I would go to my resources, and then I would search for a person and stick them in a bed that way.
Yeah, you can. That's
big long process.
Yeah.
Didn't have to.
Yep. Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. Like you said, it's a few extra steps. And that could be setup related. If it's not calling the bed list during the enrollment, then yeah, we can look at that. So you do see it when you're doing the actual enrollment.
Cool.
We can go to look at reports now if people want. We can, there's a couple options that we have. So we have a little bit of time.
I was going to say, a good question would be like, if automatically my boss asks, what's your census?
Yeah.
What's the easiest way to, is it a client and programs report, or would it be, maybe show us that one?
Yeah, so you have a few options for reports. Let's do this one. Okay. Let's see, do you have it here? Okay, so we have to kind of go over some terms first. So there's the request from a funder or supervisor, whoever it might be, for what is your roster or what is your census. Now, for census, are you asking how many people slept in a bed from August 1st to August 31st, or are you asking how many people are enrolled in the project currently? Now, okay, yeah, because just because somebody is enrolled in your emergency shelter project in HMIS does not mean that they've spent the night in that project during that window of time. So there's a few ways to look at that. There's one really good report for managing check-ins, if you run your shelter this way, is off the gear for the particular bed list or particular check-in screen you want to look at. There's the check-in roster report. So you click that, and you can actually set the date. So 08/01/2018 for that. And you can look at the begin date. You set it for that. It should have an end date there. I'll have to look at that. I'm not sure why it's only giving me a one-date option. But that gives you a view of one day what your check-ins were, and you can just see there was one person checked in. I gotta look there. Ours has a start and end. So you might have, let's see if housing check-in gives it to me. No. I'll have to, we might have to work with Caseworthy on your check-in report, because it should have a start and end date, not just a one-day view, because that's kind of silly. All right. Your other option for somebody that wants to know what your utilization has been based on who occupied a bed during a particular period, meaning there was physically somebody in the bed. You go to the wrench, go to reporting, go to operational reports, then go to services by program. All right. And this one is very important the way you set it up. And I'll talk you through this. Okay. Your start and end date for your services by program. So let's say I want almost a 1-year view, a 10-1 to an 8-3, for example. Organization. Now, you have two choices with organization in your version of Caseworthy. There's several enrollments that are tied to, for example, Shalom House program, but the owned by org and provider are showing as MARC, M-A-R-C, as the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council. That will require you to make sure that you're set to all for orgs. Because if you don't set it to all for orgs, the report may hide program enrollments under your program because you didn't ask to see, all orgs. And it's a really funny setup with Caseworthy. They have this owned by org feature. And I didn't realize this when I was started evaluating your version of Caseworthy, because in other versions of Caseworthy, it's very org specific. So if I'm running a report for Salvation Army, I'm setting my org to Salvation Army because those are the only clients I want to see. But in your copy of Caseworthy, there are clients who might be attached to your program but have a different org and provider assignment or a different org assignment. The provider and program might be Salvation Army, but the org is MARC. So to avoid missing any information, set your orgs to all, but then you have to set just your program to the one you want to run it on. And to give you guys a little bit of a tool to help, the % symbol on the search field is a wildcard symbol. It allows you to search for keywords. So for example, if I know that everything Salvation Army is Sal Army, then I'll put that in, and it's only going to bring up anything with that in the name. And I just want their family shelter, so I'm going to click that, and that's going to add that to my list of programs. Once I've done that, you're going to set your services to all. Locations, report, service categories, and regions are all going to be set to all, okay? And you can save these. If you haven't done this before, you can save report parameters. You just click save, you give the report a name, and then it'll always be there for you to recall. So you never have to fill out this form more than one time for a particular report, which is a really nice feature if you're responsible for reporting at your agency. All right. Once you've set up the form, you hit report. And this gives you a really nice graph, or a pie chart rather. And in this case, for Salvation Army, everything is related to the bed nights. So it shows me how many bed nights I have for that particular time frame. It'll show the number of distinct families. And this is that conversation we were having earlier, where the system separates by family ID, not by unit or bed list. It really doesn't care what unit or bed list somebody is in, unless it depends on which report you're running. So for example, if you don't have any bed lists associated with a provider that covers Salvation Army Crossroads Family Shelter, well then you're going to want to make sure you have that. Otherwise, you're not going to pull in the data correctly. But nonetheless, it'll show the number of families, the number of adults, the number of children, and we also have a senior there. Okay, total clients are here, so you know the total breakout for these services. Now, these services, we're going to look at the detail, because I'm going to actually have the detail for this, because obviously I don't want to show actual names. So I have a detail export without the names on there as the caper. Let's see, services by program detail. So when you click on, we'll go back here. As you look at this chart, if you want to know who these clients are, because you think this number should be higher, for example, and you want to know who's missing, well, if you click on that number, it's going to give you a detail export that looks like this, and obviously would have this other information there that I've removed. It gives you the client ID number, and it'll give you the dates of the service, and if you were doing financial information, it would have that there for you, so you could track financials if you need to. but in this case, we're just looking at bed lists or bed nights. And it'll show you every bed night that's covered by client, okay? This is where being comfortable with Excel does become useful, because then you can do things like you can create a pivot table, for example, and you can go back here and you can grab some data, and you can kind of filter things out to make it easier for you to evaluate. The other thing you got to do, one of the sort of downside to Caseworthy is they like to do their tables with a lot of merged fields. I got to kill my merges. You can easily take care of that. Just do a copy and paste, and use the paste, the 1, 2, 3 option, because that will take away all formatting. And then you can go ahead and it takes away all the merges. You do have to use valid headings, though, for a pivot table, if you're not familiar with that. And you will have to reformat here. So these are the kind of things that, until you get used to, we can help you with to drill down with some of the data that's available in Caseworthy. And I'll just grab that. Because what the report is showing you, the client ID is going to appear every time a service happened to that particular client. So as you can see, that would get pretty long. So you really want to know just the individual clients, and then maybe how many times they appeared, and how many check-ins they have. So you can see this client only has 5, this one only has 1, this person had 75 check-ins. Other things you might want to look at maybe are date related. So what dates did a particular client get a check-in? So you can filter it that way. You can see what those 5 dates are. So for example, if you know client 517408 stayed the entire month of February, well then you know that they're missing check-ins from 2/6 to 2/28, and you can go fix that. But again, the services report is good for giving you a total of number of people served, families served, and then the total number of bed nights that you've essentially registered for that time period. And that'll also help you find out who's missing a service if you think your number should be higher. I wouldn't tackle that report alone the first time. If you're trying to evaluate it, get us a screen share set up, and we'll help you dissect it so so the data makes sense before you go handing it off to somebody who might then go and use that for some funding meeting or whatever it might be. Okay. But that's one report you can use for finding out the number of services that you provided in a particular time period. Now, that said, you had 43 clients register a service, okay? But let's say your roster is 120. And that's really the number you want to give to whoever's asking for it. They just want to know your head count. They don't care how many nights somebody spent. Well, then in that case, you would run any of either APR would do it, a CAPR would do it, but the APR is probably the most useful. It's enrollment based, so anybody with an enrollment that happened within the report date range is going to be pulled in, or anybody with an open enrollment in that date range is going to be pulled in. So the only people who get excluded is somebody whose enrollment ended before the date range that you select. So I have some saved reports here. Let's see, we'll do Salvation Army. And let's just get rid of some of these. And we're just going to look at Crossroads Shelter. I'm going to leave orgs as all again, because again of that little dynamic where some of the orgs are with other agencies besides Salvation Army. Click report. And this is going to give me a basic head count and then some demographic data that the APR provides for everybody served in that time period. So you can see a very different number. The bed night report showed 43 people with a service. The program enrollment evaluation, which is what an APR is showing that 120 people were served in the date range. So again, that's a distinction between who received a service versus who was actually enrolled. And it's up to you to determine which number the person is asking for when they ask you that question. Okay? Any other questions about the available reports? You do have another field in the APRs that does get evaluated, and it is related to services. It's this hyperlink here, Q5, Q6. And what that one does is it looks at inactive records, and it's for street outreach and emergency shelters. So what that does is it's going to look at a record, and I'll give you, actually, I have the exact definition for you here. Okay. So the inactive records table is the number of inactive records will show the number of clients where the latest bed night or check-in was more than 90 days before the report end date. All right, so the client's last bed night is 12/23/16, but the report end date is 9/30. So essentially, that client would obviously would not fall on the report. That client would be an indication of, well, there's some data missing. Obviously, that's an extreme example. But again, so what's important to note is that if a client is dormant, meaning there's no services being recorded, then that client is going to show on that table as not having any services in that time period of that 90-day time period within your report parameters. All right. And depending on the type of shelter you operate, that number can be very different. Entry-exit shelters, they don't trigger services the same way as a night-by-night shelter does. A night-by-night shelter records it as an actual bed night service in the services table that you can see. An entry-exit shelter does not. So you'll probably find if you run this on an entry-exit shelter that this inactive records is going to be a little bit different than if you were looking at services, for example. So just be aware of that based on your project setup. And there's still some work being done on ES project setups. Like I said, I've been working with Salvation Army's data for a couple of weeks at this point, trying to get that to reflect the way everybody feels it should. And it is a little bit of time to untangle. But that's some of your options for evaluating client records that either showing activity, not showing activity, and what to do. Entry-exit shelters are triggered by, just as it would sound, a project entry and a project exit. So as long as the client is exited in a timely manner, then you'll capture data within the report date range. So just make sure that if the client has exited, that you identify that, and if they haven't, that's fine. You're just going to get essentially a quote-unquote service for every day they're at your shelter. But if they physically left the shelter and haven't come back since June, then all those services from June until August 29th are probably not reality. And once you exit that client, though, you'll solve your problem. But just make sure that you keep on top of it if you're an entry-exit shelter, those entries and exits. Okay, I think that was my last ES. Yeah, that was my last ES slide. Yeah, I don't, any other questions for reports that people want to see? And the other thing I would say too is if you have been manually maintaining data on like an Excel spreadsheet, that would be another thing to reach out and say, hey, let's have a screen share. You can show us what your Excel spreadsheet looks like and if there's anything relatable and caseworthy. And I was as guilty as this back when I was on the service provider side. I had more spreadsheets than I knew what to do with because Service Point just didn't provide a lot of flexibility when it came to if my supervisor asked me for a particular number of something, I had to rely on the spreadsheets I was maintaining because they were so customized. But caseworthy, you have a few more what they call operational reports. There's a lot more funder reports now. So one or somewhere in there might be a report that will give you what you're looking for.
Well, Jim, I can tell you that I probably have some more questions in another week after we dig a little more into this, but that was great.
Okay, I'm glad it was helpful. And definitely take some time when you get back to your office. Think about if there's something that you want to look at. Myself and the staff from Mark, we can do screen shares with you and with everybody there to take a look at how you're kind of tracking your data in HMIS, and is it being done the way your funder expects it to be done? That's really the key.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jim. This is Hannah Eve.
Yeah.
Does this wrap up our session then?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and was it Johnson County that or Restart? I forget which. That we do have a little bit of time because again, it's just it's 11 o'clock for you all down there.
Yes.
Yeah. So if there's something that somebody has that they want to look at specifically for their project, we could do that now, or we can schedule time next week. It's entirely up to you. I know you guys have a ton of other things, I'm sure, to do today, other than brood over HMIS any longer than you already have.
I'd say I'd love to stick around. I've got some time.
All right, that's good. So if somebody does have a specific question about their project, we can at least maybe start the diagnosis and set up time after for something later next week.
That's good.
Cool.
All right. So it's Shalom that we want to look at, Catholic Charity Shalom House?
Yes, correct.
Yep. All right. Let's go over there.
So trying to think if we want to look at the setup or if we want to just kind of where we want to start here.
Yeah, we'll start with setup. Shalom House. Let me go. We did kind of dig in a little bit. I made a couple notes. Reports, bed nights, meals, set up with check-ins or automatic. So I wanted to understand a little better the automatic check-ins that you were talking about. Where's your orders? Those are here. The charities in Northeast, providers, and Shalom House. Okay. Where is it?
Okay, so you went to set up provider resources.
Yeah.
And then
That's your bed list. So you do have a lot of. Let me see here. That's what I want. Okay. Slot assignment at check-in. Acquired auto. Yeah, so how did you, how did you get, or which bed list did you get to do automatic check-ins at a particular time?
Okay, let me see here. Because we had to create a bed, or we created a new resource called KCMetroHMIS Emergency Shelter. Well, no, we had to create a new bed night service because the current bed night, I'm kind of all over the place. So the bed night we created, it had a different value associated with it than the original one.
Okay.
And let me see here because I was trying to figure out how to get back there.
Because this. Yeah, so for example, this particular setup would lend to what I thought. This is at least where I thought it would have occurred, because it's got the reoccurrence there, but no auto check-in is on. But nice CC. Okay, this is what you created. It looks like attendance service. That's specific to you. You guys create that. Because this is usually a generic value, and I see your agency is associated with it. It's not giving it to me, though. No. So did you guys create that attendance service, that CCNEK emerge?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Because we thought that's what we needed to do to tie it. Because that is the program that we enroll them in. So we try to make sure that was the required program for them to then get checked into that night.
Gotcha. Okay. I don't know how that would impact the services. I don't know if that's just a label or if it actually looks somewhere else. Let's see. So I'd have to look at this with our database developer. I'd have to look over your project with him.
Yeah, because what we did is we tried to create that meal.
Yeah.
That if you scroll down a little bit, well.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah. Yeah, I did see it. Yeah.
But for some reason, the meals was never adding up, and it was never counting, but the bed nights would.
Yeah. Yeah, because you wouldn't assign the meals to the provider. You would assign the meals to the service, unless you want the meals to happen automatically, which is what it sounds like you want.
Yeah, because we do it regardless, because if for some reason there's not a guy physically there, we leave a late plate for him.
Right.
So we assign it regardless of if the guy actually eats it or not, because it's an offer.
Yeah. Okay.
But that does make sense now that you're saying that, because the bed nights is tied to the resource.
Yep.
Or the provider, but then I guess, yeah, the food wouldn't be, because it's not a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
Actually, it's more of a usage setup, I think. Usage setup. Okay. All right. All right. So let's go look now. Yeah. So you actually have to go in. So how do you decide what bed somebody goes into?
See, that's really tough because it's the open bed. The only thing, our shelter is set up like an army barracks. If you can visualize, 2 rows of 12 bunk beds.
Yeah.
And the only time that we might have to get picky is if it's like a bottom bed that the guy needs because he's too old to climb on the top one. But usually it's just whatever's open. So some of that has been challenging because I'm trying to run a report or trying to look at what bed is open, or the easiest way to get a snapshot of, okay, we got a new guy, well, you know, where do we put him? So right now, the beds we have, in case where they do not correlate with, how do we have them named at the shelter? So that's one thing that we try to think about, how we move all that around and what we do with it.
Yeah. So how many total beds do you have?
We have 24 down in our, I guess, the big bunkhouse.
Yeah.
And at the very bottom of that page, you see something called top floor.
Yep.
Which we have 3 beds up there, which one is kind of a medical needs bed. Yep. And then the other 2 are kind of, more transitional living. So we don't, like, those aren't going to be part of like coordinated entry when we get there.
Right, right. So what I'm seeing is that you really only need one list, and in that list you need 23 beds, or however many beds, and then a second list for this top floor project with this top 4 list with however many beds you have. Yeah, you don't necessarily need it broken out because you essentially have created like 24 bed lists. It looks like.
That's kind of what we were wondering at one point, because it looked like when we created it that we could have put like the little blue icons or the orange icons, and we could have put 24 of them on like one sheet.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go let me show you here. And this is what I just did for, you know what, I'll do that. This is what I just did for Salvation Army. I'll show you there because you'll see that what their setup looks like now. And because they had something similar to what you're describing. Okay, so you see Salvation Army set up here. They had everything that's marked inactive was essentially a unit with X number of beds, like 6 beds per unit. And if a family came in, you know, they would put one family in unit 1, one family in unit 2, 3, 4, whatever. But in reality, they didn't need all these bed lists. They just needed one bed list that had all their beds that could be broken out by units. So what I did is I created, and I'm going to go into their back end now here to show you what it looks like on the setup side.
Okay, Jim, I'm talking to my shelter manager here. Because when we did it, the big long list was one bed piece, second
Yeah.
bed, but I guess we could have one entry.
Yep.
It says like bunkhouse or whatever,
Yep.
and then click on that, and then within there we can build.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see they have this same setup. They have this resource tied to their provider with 54, a capacity of 54. Then you go into their housing or their usage, and they had these all these active, essentially usages or bed lists. What I essentially did is I took all of those and layered them in here in this one bed list now. Oops, sorry, I went to the wrong place. Right here and slot inventory. So you'll see now everything is represented under that one bed list. They have a unit breakout, so unit 1, bed 1, all the way down to unit 1, bed 6. And that gives them some control with their families so they can group families together in a single unit. But if you're dealing with all singles, you don't even need that. You just need bed 1 through bed X or bed N, whichever total number of beds you have, which is a little easier than it is for a family setup. But nonetheless, it does the same thing. Then you're only going to one place to deal with it.
Yeah, so Ben, would we ever want to do like, I don't know if we call it unit, but like top bunk, bottom bunk? Or would you just number them just 1, 2, and knowing that like evens would be bottom?
We could do like 1A, 1B, stuff like that.
You could, but when you think about it, what is my question always is, as you're designing this, what report information might you have to fulfill? Would you ever have to run a report that says how many people are in the top bunk?
No.
Okay, so if let's say you didn't have bunk beds, but you just had all beds, so you took your bunk beds apart and you had enough space where there weren't bunk beds, all your beds were just laid out. You would then just call them bed 1 through bed N, whatever your total count would be. So that's why I would just say, for your particular case, it would be a total count of all beds, regardless of bunks. The only reason maybe you would want that is if for some reason you needed to know, okay, well, who slept in bed, but even still, it'll be numbered. So if who slept in bed 7 because somebody found contraband, in the pillowcase of bed 7. Well, then you could still go to your bed night. You could go look and say, oh, well, Joe Smith was enrolled or put in bed 7 last night. But I'm sure you probably have something on paper that would be even quicker than going to HMIS. But nonetheless, just ask yourself the question, when would I ever need a report to do what it is that I want to do? And then you can kind of form your setup from there.
Cool, I gotcha.
Yeah, and if you need help, because I'm guessing that you have people enrolled or are in all of those beds of yours.
We do, but then the problem is there's a few that have been there for a while that I need to check out. Like my program enrollment is up to date. Everybody that's in the shelter is enrolled in the program, but then when I switch over to my resources, some of the guys in those have been there way too long that need to be checked out.
Right. So you just, all you have to do is, which you've probably done before, I'm sure, is just, if this person, for example, needed to go, if they should have exited, you would just put an end date there, whatever the end date was assigned to the program enrollment end date. All right, so that's all you would need to do to exit somebody. But let's say this guy needed to, let's say we do this plan where you have one shelter called front room and this other one called top floor, or however you want to do it. And let's say that everybody in all these other bed lists had to be moved to that shelter or to that new bed list. We would do that for you. And what I mean by that, so let's look here, for example. So you have this guy, Stephen Phillips. Let's find him. Boy, you got a few. You happen to know which one is your guy?
Guy who was somewhat younger, so I would say probably the 85, born in 85, the second one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's see. This one here, yeah, right? This is the enrollment, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So again, this is where program enrollment ID number becomes really valuable because what I can do is when we create that new usage, we can go to one of the tools we have and I can go to the resource, and this is the bed list. This is the current usage ID that enrollment is assigned to. All I have to do is change this number to the other usage, the new usage.
So is that usage for the resource?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is another good communication. Well, you won't be able to see the usage ID number. Well, no, you can. You can see it in the setup screen. It'll show you. So let's go look at that. I'll show you what it's referring to so you have a reference because you do all this back-end stuff already. So all we have to do is just change that usage ID to that to the new bed list or the new usage essentially, and that'll move the record without you having to do anything. Where's your salon provider? All right, so you see these numbers here, usage ID?
Uh-huh.
So this guy we said was 5170. Yeah, 5170. So he's in bed 9. So let's say we create this new usage that's here and the usage ID is 5416. All I have to do is change that to 5416 and he's moved. He's off of the other usage, he's on the new usage, and you haven't had to do a thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's really easy to fix. It's just a matter of creating it and then determining which clients you want me to move.
Okay, so do me a favor, go to the bottom of that, to the top floor.
You say that one more time?
I was gonna say, just go back to the resources, and then the top floor. Because I'm like 99% sure I want to show my house manager who's staying next to me. So yeah, the top floor, just to see the resources there. Is there any way we can? Because there's 3 different beds I've set up in there.
Yeah.
So I wanted him to kind of see what it would look like if we had like all of those under, bottom floor or something like that, for lack of better words.
Okay, so for this bed list, you have a total of 3 beds? Okay. Yeah, let's go look there.
Because now I'm following you, because that's what we should have done in the beginning. Is when we did the top floor, we had 3 beds. We should have just done, bottom or whatever it was.
Yeah.
However you want to name it.
Yeah. Johnny John and the 6-bed operator, right?
Okay. So that's how we have that set up with 3 beds, and then we need to set up basically the bunkhouse with 1 entry within 24 slots. So we have a capacity of 24.
Yeah, so where is that one? Where's top floor? Is it all?
Bottom.
Oh, there it is, okay, yep. All right, so you have 3 beds there. Let's see, slot inventory. So I'm guessing you have 3 here. So this is actually, this is how you would want it set. You would want everything set up like your top floor project, or your top.
Exactly.
Floor. Yeah. Yep. That's a good model for the rest. So yeah. So everything. You would then create something. Do an add usage here. Create one called bottom floor, whatever you want to call it. Make put the number of beds you would want. So like this one is showing. Yeah, so yeah, single bed, all the way down to 24. The nice thing is that it should, there is an auto feature, but it looks, there's 24 there. Yeah, you would have to create another resource to take advantage of it, which might be worth your while.
Because then what you're saying is we don't want to delete when we create the new resource. We don't want to delete the others. We just want to rename them inactive.
Yeah. Don't delete them until all the clients have been moved off of them.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
And then once that happens and you're comfortable with the way the data is appearing, then we can go in and get rid of them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Might be able to.
And do me one quick favor, click on the gear wheel and do on top floor, and it says room designer.
Yep.
See that? Yeah, because that'll show, that's how when we go to set it up, we'll have that's got the 3 beds we just named them, room 1, room 2,
Yep.
and then the medical bed.
Okay,
Right.
and that's why, whenever we place a name on it, goes orange.
Yeah, so when you actually check somebody in, it becomes orange, but then when we design the bunkhouse or the 24 bed area, we'll have 24 of those little beds, and we'll just name them bed 1 through bed 24.
And at that point, it should be accurate name for bed.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, cool, thank you, Jim.
Yeah. No, that's good. You guys have a really strong grasp of how to set all this stuff up, so that's good. That's to your benefit.
I wouldn't say strong, I said we did it one time and a couple times, so I've got a decent idea of it.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's the bed list setup in Caseworthy is probably one of the most challenging features that it has. So.
Yeah. So hopefully once we get that, we'll be doing fine.
Yeah.